Have you ever felt like a simple sentence could change your entire life? Well, that's exactly what happened to Beatrice, a wealthy, well-adjusted woman who thought she knew every corner of her story. But all it took was an innocent walk with her son João, and an unexpected shout for everything to fall apart. "Mom, he's my brother!" Words spoken with the naturalness of a child, but which carried an avalanche of past, secrets and discoveries that not even the most experienced detective could have foreseen. What if I told you that behind this sentence were hidden years of omission, a silent betrayal, and a lost son who grew up on the streets, far from everything that should be his by right? Hard to believe, right? But life is like that, full of twists and turns that only time, or a painful truth, can unlock. This story is not just about fatherhood or child abandonment. It is about identity, family recognition, guilt and forgiveness, and yes, about the courage to face ghosts from the past with an open heart. What would you do if your child recognized someone you didn't even know existed? If you discovered that the man you loved was hiding more than just memories? Get ready, because this journey goes beyond a family reunion. It delves into the invisible pains of social inequality, in the emotional cracks of a separated family, and in the silent struggle of those who grew up among cardboard and absence. This story will keep you hooked from beginning to end, and may even make you look at certain coincidences in life differently. Ready to understand what happens when the past knocks on the door of the present? João, a curious and sensitive boy, was walking absent-mindedly alongside his mother, Beatriz, after an ordinary day. There was no indication that that afternoon would change their lives. When his eyes met Rafael's, a street urchin with a face covered in dust and worn-out shoes, he suddenly stopped and dropped the bombshell. "Mom, he's my brother." It wasn't just the sentence that froze time, it was the certainty with which he said it. Beatrice, taken by surprise, tried to ignore it, but something in her son's tone resonated deeply. It was as if João was seeing something that she could no longer deny. She took a closer look. Rafael was slightly older, but his features, his gaze, his nose, the way he frowned, everything was frighteningly similar to João. Beatrice froze, her heart racing as if she had just opened a box from the past that she didn't even know existed. And then, her brain started working overtime. What if it were true? What if the late Arthur, the man she loved and lost, had left more than just memories? What seemed like just a child's phrase became a trigger, a sign, a call. It's funny how children have this emotional radar that adults lose over time, right? João had no ulterior motives. He just felt, and maybe that's why he hit the nail on the head. Children perceive connections that we, bogged down in logic and justifications, ignore. His gesture, simple and direct, was the spark that lit the flame of truth that Beatrice would go on to seek tooth and nail. Nothing would ever be the same again. An innocent cry triggered one of the greatest emotional investigations of her life. This moment, this start of the story, already shows us how small encounters can carry great truths. There is nothing more symbolic than a rich boy looking into the eyes of a street kid and seeing a brother. Social criticism, destiny, and family drama are already embedded there. It was more than a phrase. It was the past knocking on the door with force. But what would Beatrice do with this childish intuition transformed into suspicion? That is when the story begins to unfold. Beatrice was not the kind of woman who let herself be carried away by any impression. But after that day, something inside her could no longer remain still. She returned home with her heart racing and a restlessness that not even silence could contain. At night, while João slept, she rummaged through drawers, old boxes, dusty folders, until, at the bottom of a closet, she found something that made her stop. A letter, carefully folded in Arthur's handwriting. Just seeing the handwriting made her feel a chill run down her spine, and there began the blossoming of a secret of the past. In the letter, Arthur confessed what she never knew, or perhaps never wanted to know. He wrote that he had made a mistake, a slip-up, a moment of weakness with Luciana, his then workmate. He said that Luciana got pregnant, but disappeared before he could do anything about it. It was just once, he said. Once was enough to turn Beatrice's world upside down. And what was worse, he tried to hide it until the end. He left a lost son, an unresolved trail and a hole in her chest. Her husband's silence now gained new echoes. It's amazing how ghosts from the past don't die. They just wait for the right time to reappear. And with Arthur, it was no different. Even dead, he was more present than ever. Beatrice, previously skeptical, now faced the real possibility that Raphael wasn't just a boy who looked like her son. He could, in fact, be part of her story. Arthur's words hammered in her mind like a belated confession, and with them came a new kind of pain, that of not having been included in the truth from the beginning. The feeling of emotional betrayal, it was inevitable. From that moment on, everything changed. Beatrice stopped being just a worried mother and became a true investigator of her own past. Every note, every memory, every conversation with Arthur before he left took on a new meaning. It was like putting together a puzzle with pieces hidden by his guilt. But she knew she couldn't stop there. If that boy on the street was really her son, or Joan's half-brother, she needed to be sure, and at that point, the next step was clear. To do the right thing, DNA test. But what she would find in the process, this was just the beginning. Beatrice's decision did not come from impulse, but from necessity. After finding the letter and sifting through the clues left by Arthur, she could no longer ignore the truth hammering at her mind. She looked for a discreet laboratory, one of those that deal more with rich people wanting to know about betrayals than mothers looking for lost children. She quickly scheduled the test, taking a deep breath with each click. That was when the hardest part began, finding Raphael and convincing him, or convincing the homeless family that took him in, to do the test, DNA test. And it wasn't just blood that was at stake there, it was everyone's future. When she arrived at the square where Raphael used to hang out, Beatrice didn't just see a boy covered in sand and tired. She saw a child with eyes just like Joan's, with the same curious way of observing the world. She introduced herself carefully, got down on his level, spoke respectfully, and most importantly, truthfully. Donna Nilda, who had taken care of the boy since he was a baby, looked deep into Beatrice's eyes and realized that she wasn't there to cause trouble. She was looking for something bigger. The conversation was tense but sincere. And, after a few days, the yes came. The boy agreed to take the test. The day of the collection was silent, full of unspoken emotions. Beatrice was shaking. Nilda was holding the boy's hand tightly, and Raphael was just observing everything with a maturity that did not match his 7 years. The exam was quick, but the waiting time was eternal. Beatrice did not sleep. Joan noticed his mother's strange silence, and deep down, everyone knew that this result would change everything. And when the report arrived, printed in cold and objective letters, it said, 999% genetic compatibility. Raphael was Arthur's son. He was Joan's brother. Their lives would never be the same again. Now stop and think how to deal with a revelation like that, Beatrice cried. She cried with relief, pain, fear, and love, all at the same time. It was the confirmation of a suspicion that was already screaming inside her. But with the certainty came dilemmas. What to do with Raphael? How to tell Joan the truth? How to face Luciana, the woman who disappeared and now left traces everywhere? The DNA test brought much more than scientific data. It brought the responsibility of rebuilding bridges that even she didn't know existed, and it also brought the beginning of a new conflict. When Beatrice thought the hardest part was over, life showed her that the deepest pains were yet to come. The confirmation of the DNA test brought relief, yes, but it also opened the door to a new battle, this time in court. Luciana, who had disappeared from the map for years, re-emerged from the shadows with a sharp lawyer named Antonio Ramiro. Tall, self-assured, and with a smile disguised as politeness. He didn't come to talk, he came to confront, and his first sentence was like a punch. "My client wants custody of Raphael." Beatrice was shocked. How could someone who had abandoned her own child now feel entitled to demand anything? But Ramiro was not shaken by emotional arguments. He presented documents, allegations of emotional abandonment, evidence that Luciana had tried to start over, and that Raphael had the right to his biological mother. It was the bare and raw law, devoid of affection. And so what could be a family reunion turned into a legal dispute. Beatrice, who only wanted to take Raphael in, was now seen as a threat, a rich woman trying to steal the boy from his biological mother. It's funny how the system often ignores human nuances. No one saw that Raphael was only alive and emotionally whole because he was taken in by strangers, nor that Beatrice was fighting for him with more affection than any signed paper. And the hardest part, João began to feel the weight of the tension at home. With each envelope with a legal notice, the atmosphere grew heavier. Beatrice had to explain to a 6-year-old boy that he might lose his newly discovered brother. And then things got personal. She decided that she would fight with everything she had, even if it meant a long and exhausting process. At that moment, the focus changed. It was no longer about discovering the truth. It was about protecting what was already true in the hearts of everyone there. Beatrice hired lawyers, gathered witnesses, did everything by the book. But she knew that deep down, the greatest proof was in Raphael's gaze when he called her by name, in the comfortable silence between him and João, in the small gestures that only real families have. Judicial Guard became the battlefield of something that should have been love. And like every war, no one came out unscathed. But Beatrice was not one to give up, and she still had a lot to discover. In the midst of the legal, emotional, and personal turmoil, it was João who brought a breath of lightness. While the adults exchanged arguments and documents, he just wanted to know if he could share the room with Raphael. "I can give him one of my pillows, Mom," he said, with the sweetness of someone who doesn't need genetics to recognize a sibling. That broke Beatrice. She realized that despite the pain and doubt, there was something pure blossoming there. Family reconnection. Not the one that is formalized in a notary's office, but the one that is born in the eyes, in coexistence, in the simple affection of sharing toys and secrets. Beatrice, who had previously carried the burden of having been deceived, now felt a new kind of responsibility, that of bringing these two boys, sons of the same man, together under the same roof. It was as if she were rebuilding a home with completely new pieces. Raphael, on the other hand, seemed increasingly open. There were still traces of the hard life on the streets, of course, but his smile was now more confident. It was as if he had finally found a place in the world, and Beatrice, even though she was shaken, saw in this a meaning to all the storm she was facing. It's funny how love sometimes comes through the door of chaos. No one planned it. João didn't ask for a brother. Raphael didn't ask for a new mother. And Beatrice didn't want to rewrite her story. But there they were, connected by a series of coincidences that seemed more like destiny. Emotional transformation. Beatrice's experience was profound. From a woman who carried resentment and distrust, she became a bridge between two broken lives. She learned that forgiveness does not come from a formal request, but from the willingness to move forward, with lightness, with compassion, with courage. The house changed. The uncomfortable silence gave way to the noise of toys, restrained laughter, and conversations around the table. It wasn't a perfect scenario. Far from it. There were still legal battles ahead, doubts in the air, open scars, but there was also something rare, the real chance to build a new story. Beatrice was no longer just João's mother. She was also the guardian of a new affection. And this, no matter how much the world outside tried to label or question it, only they could feel. And the truth is, there was still more to discover. Beatrice was never the type to settle for half-truths, and with Raphael, this became even more evident. Knowing that he was Arthur's son was not enough. She needed to understand, because that boy grew up on the streets, who abandoned him, and what Luciana had been hiding all these years. It was then that she decided to hire an old acquaintance, Mauricio, a discreet detective, the kind who says little but knows a lot. In a few weeks, he brought the first clues. Raphael was found wrapped in a blue cloth with a simple and cruel note: "Take care of him, please." That hit like a punch. The story was even harder than Beatrice imagined. Donna Nilda and her Adão, a couple of homeless people, had found the baby and decided to raise him as best they could. No crib, nanny, or health insurance. It was improvised, in the daily struggle between scraps of cardboard and indifferent looks from society. And even so, Raphael grew up surrounded by genuine love. They treated him like their grandson, even though they were not blood relatives. This left Beatrice in shock. How could someone abandon a child and move on with their life? And more than that, how did Raphael survive with such sweetness? A personal investigation, Beatrice's life took a new direction. She began to cross-reference names, dates, and old documents from the company where Arthur and Luciana had worked together. Everything led to one conclusion. Luciana had disappeared intentionally, gone into hiding, and left the child to fend for herself. There had been no accident, no mistake. The abandonment was real, and with that, Beatrice's anger grew. At the same time that she felt sorry for Luciana for her choices, she felt anger and a strange guilt for having given João everything that Raphael had never had. It was a mix of feelings that consumed her. But one thing was clear. Raphael was not just a charity case. He was part of the family, with a painful story that needed to be respected. Beatrice understood that it was not enough to welcome him. It was necessary to recognize and honor that past. There was no way to erase the lost years, but there was a way to do things differently from then on. The investigation, more than revealing truths, served to show the size of the responsibility she now had in her hands. And Beatrice, with all her pain and courage, decided that she would not stop, because Raphael deserved more than just answers. He deserved justice, and also love. Beatrice has always lived surrounded by comfort, a spacious house, an air-conditioned car, and coffee made at the right time. The contrast with Raphael's reality was a silent slap in the face. When she sat on the sidewalk next to Mrs. Nilda and Mr. Adão, she felt for the first time the warm ground beneath her legs and the strong smell of the street. It was another world, a universe that she had barely noticed before when driving past. But there, sitting at the same height as the boy her son called brother, Beatrice experienced something new, real empathy, not the kind of pretty talk, the kind that hurts, that transforms. Donna Nilda looked at Beatrice with suspicion, and rightly so. How many times had people like her been ignored, mistreated, thrown out of squares by someone wearing the same expensive perfume? But Beatrice's gaze was different. She didn't want to take Raphael away. She wanted to understand, share, care. And in that gesture of listening, an unlikely bond began to emerge. Not between social classes, but between mothers. Both, in their own way, had raised Raphael, and now both wanted the best for him. What was emerging there was more than an agreement. It was the possibility of a union between two realities. A social inequality, which had previously been a backdrop, was now at the forefront. How is it possible that two children, sons of the same father, had such different childhoods? While João played at home with expensive toys, Raphael faced cold, hunger, and abandonment. But that didn't stop the two from recognizing each other as brothers. Because childhood love, when not contaminated by judgments, ignores society's etiquette, and that was what touched Beatrice deeply. Realizing that, despite their differences, the connection existed, and it needed to be preserved with care and respect. That's where the story gains strength, the empathy between different realities. It didn't come easy, but it came with truth. Beatrice didn't try to buy Raphael with gifts. She approached him humbly, listening, asking, offering. Donna Nilda, in turn, slowly lowered her guard, understanding that perhaps the rich woman on the other side wasn't an enemy. And Raphael, well, Raphael just observed everything with the wide eyes of someone who had seen more of life than any adult. And perhaps, in his silence, there was the hope that these two very different realities could, indeed, coexist under the same roof, for the sake of the one who matters most, him. What Arthur did or didn't do kept echoing like a stone thrown into a lake. The ripples kept expanding. When Beatrice found at the bottom of a box an old bank transfer receipt for Luciana, the penny dropped. Arthur knew. He knew about his son. He knew about the mistake. And he tried in his own way to make up for with money what he didn't have the courage to resolve with lawsuits. That yellowed paper was more than just proof. It was proof that the consequences of the unresolved past, they don't disappear. They just wait for the right moment to reappear. Beatrice felt everything at the same time. Anger, frustration, relief, guilt. How could he hide something so serious? How could he not have the courage to tell the truth? Maybe he thought he was protecting his family, or protecting himself. But the result of this was a separated family, one lost son, and now two boys trying to understand what united them. Arthur's omission cost him dearly, and not just for him. The omission took its emotional toll on Beatrice, Raphael's childhood, and even João's innocence, who now had to deal with the unexpected weight of the truth. This is one of the most powerful points in the story. How many families live trying to keep up appearances, shelving unresolved stories, thinking that time will erase what was done? But time does not erase, it archives. And one day, when least expected, everything comes to light. Sometimes in the cry of a child, sometimes in a forgotten letter. The truth is that inured ghosts become monsters, and Beatrice understood this firsthand. There was no point in blaming the deceased or pretending that nothing had happened. All that was left now was to choose between moving forward with courage or living as a hostage to secrets that could no longer be hidden. A hidden inheritance. The legacy left by Arthur was not just made up of material goods or corporate papers. It was an emotional legacy that Beatrice now needed to manage, and unlike money, this cannot be resolved with inventory. It is through dialogue, reconstruction, and patience. Her decision to face everything, what hurt, what wounded, what revolted, was what began to change the course of history. Because accepting the consequences of the past is not about fixing what happened, it is about not repeating the silence, and above all, ensuring that her children, all of them, grow up with the chance to live something better. Raphael, 7 years old and deeply silent, seemed to carry questions in his eyes that he didn't even know how to formulate. Who am I? Why was I left behind? Who are these people who now claim to be my family? It's hard to imagine what goes on in the mind of a child who has spent his life molding himself to absences. And yet, there he was, trying to understand his place in the world. Beatrice watched this with a heavy heart. She knew that it wasn't enough to say, "You're Arthur's son." She needed to give him time, space, and affection so that he could discover his own identity, child identity. While João saw himself reflected in childhood photos, Raphael only had blurred memories of sidewalks, suspicious looks, and freezing cold nights. It was a different kind of memory. Beatrice realized that she couldn't compare or demand that he fit into a new reality overnight. Building a sense of belonging doesn't come by decree. It comes in the little things. At coffee time, in the care taken with clothes, in the way people call each other by name with tenderness. And even without saying much, Raphael began to change. It was as if, little by little, a root began to take hold in that new soil. This whole process raised questions for Beatrice that go far beyond motherhood. She began to think about how many children live lost, without knowing where they came from or who they belong to. How many are taken from one home to another, without ever feeling like they have a real place. Raphael's story was just one among thousands. And at the same time, It was unique. That's why each gesture of acceptance by her was an act of resistance against abandonment, against being forgotten. It was her way of saying, you matter, you have a story, and you have a future. Belonging is not limited to a surname or a result of DNA test. It is built with constancy, with patience. Raphael began to see himself as part of the family when he realized that he was heard, respected, and that no one was going to give up on him. Beatrice also found herself again in this process. The woman she was before no longer existed. Now, more than João's mother, she was also a haven for a boy that life brought unexpectedly, and this, more than any inheritance, became the most powerful legacy of this journey. As the story of Beatrice, João, and Raphael unfolded, one thing became increasingly clear. The problem was not just familial, it was structural. The society that romanticizes the overcoming of a street child like Raphael is the same one that turns a blind eye to the child abandonment every day. What revolted Beatrice the most was not just what Arthur hid or what Luciana did. It was realizing that Raphael grew up without anyone from the system asking about him, protecting him, or guaranteeing him a minimum of dignity. His life exposed the flaws in the social machinery. How many children like Raphael are there out there, sleeping on cardboard, being ignored by the same people who later applaud happy endings on the internet? Beatrice found herself faced with a silent but profound criticism to this unequal structure that protects some and forgets others. While João grew up surrounded by care and privileges, Raphael fought daily for attention, food, and affection, and this was no accident. It was the consequence of a social model that chooses who deserves care based on their zip code, clothing, or birth certificate. The story also takes a look at conventional family structures. What defines a family? Is it blood, the name on the ID, legal custody? Or is it constant care, presence, unconditional love? Raphael had nothing from the first group, but he received everything from the second, from Mrs. Nilda and Mr. Adão. And now, alongside Beatrice and João, he found another form of bond, that of affective choice. This breaking of the pattern is powerful. It shows that a true family is not a ready-made formula. It is a living organism that adapts, welcomes, and rebuilds. Finally, there is the figure of the lawyer Antonio Ramiro, which symbolizes the cold side of the law, the one that operates with technical arguments but ignores emotional well-being. He is the face of the structure that sees a child as a piece of evidence, not as a human being. And that is the scariest part. The video does not scream outrage, but whispers hard truths. And in this whisper, it makes us wonder how many Raphaels are being treated like numbers, while the world signs papers thinking it has solved everything. Maybe it is time to rethink not only laws, but the way we look at the stories we think we understand. The story of Beatrice, João, and Raphael is one of those that echoes in your mind even after the video ends. After all, how do you face the secrets that time insisted on hiding? How do you rebuild what was broken by omission, abandonment, and inequality? If you've come this far, you've probably felt at some point that this story also speaks to parts of you, those that have questioned identity, belonging, or the power of truth. Now the question remains, what would you do in Beatrice's place? Would you dare to dig into your past, to face a legal battle for another woman's child, to make room in your heart and home for an unknown boy? And what's more, do you believe that emotional justice is worth as much as legal justice? Think carefully. Stories like this are not just family dramas. They are reflections of our own society and the way we see others. If this story touched you in any way, I invite you to continue reflecting. Share your opinion in the comments. Do you think Raphael should stay with Beatrice or Luciana? Leave your answer below. It might help other people think differently too. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and follow our next videos. Here, each story is more than entertainment. It's a conversation about real life, choices, and transformation. See you in the next chapter. Until then, reflect, what defines a family for you?